So recently I was asked what programming language I recommended to someone who was wanting to get started on the web, and I instantly said HTML. Unfortunately, this was on Twitter, so it didn't take too long before I started getting in trouble for this suggestion and being told that it's not real programming and that it's just a markup language. HTML has been around for over 25 years and forms the building blocks of the web that we know today. And while I accept the fact that it is a markup language, it's also the foundation of a lot of the other languages that we use. And knowing HTML is essential to be able to go on and learn things like CSS, JavaScript, and even PHP. Even though it's a markup language doesn't mean that HTML shouldn't get attention like the more fun languages, CSS and JavaScript, do. But when was the last time that you actually looked at a new HTML standard? Do you know the right element to use for an audio file? What about for a definition? What about when you should and shouldn't be using a button? Now, because we all know HTML tonight, I want to make this a little bit fun. So tonight we're going to play a game. I need 3 volunteers from the audience. Yes. Okay, throughout my presentation this evening, there's going to be an opportunity to answer a question. Don't worry, they're multiple choice questions. You get 4 options. We were hoping to have buzzers, but my dog has unfortunately broken all of his toys that make noise, and everybody else's were like, well, it squeaks, but it's disgusting. So you're either going to have to make your own noise or, you know, just raise your hand or something boring like that. Someone at the back, Ben, is going to be keeping score of who has the most correct answers. If my lovely volunteers are unable to give me a correct answer, I will throw it out to the audience as well. And at the end, whoever has the most points will get a prize. So, who's ready to play So You Think You Know HTML? I was really worried I wouldn't get any excitement from that. It'd just be dead. HTML elements aren't just for us to put content in, and they're not just a way for us to select things using our CSS and our JavaScript. Semantically correct HTML is essential for screen readers and other assistive technologies. For example, a screen reader knows what type of content to expect from certain elements and interprets it for the user to make up for the fact that they can't see what's going on the screen. But although I'm only going to be using screen readers as an example tonight, it's important to remember they're not the only type of assistive technology that people use. And it's good to keep in mind that people might be using something else. For example, have you ever considered how people would consume your website using a Braille reader? For example, we use bold and italic to signify emphasis for a specific phrase of text. But how does someone with a screen reader know that we've done this? B and I tags, which have traditionally always been used for bold and italic, I'll leave you to guess which one's which, they apply formatting only, and the screen reader will ignore these tags and will continue to read the text as usual. Whereas the strong and emphasis tags are semantic tags that the screen reader will interpret and let the user know that there is emphasis on this text. Sometimes it'll even read it in a different voice. So remember, next time you think that accessibility is too hard, take a little step and make sure you're at least using the right element for the job. Semantic HTML isn't just for accessibility either. Structure of how you structure your site affects how it's used by a increasing range of technologies, including voice recognition software and your smartwatch. Even your SEO is affected by how well you've structured your HTML. First question for this evening. I would like to create a button to allow users to download a catalog PDF from my site. Should I use an anchor tag, a clickable div, a button, or a clickable span? That's the thinking music. Okay, Euros did go first. So Euros, what's the answer?
Button.
Wrong. Incorrect.
It's wrong. Okay, the correct answer is in fact link, so no points. A div is a layout element, and it doesn't actually get keyboard focus when someone navigates to it with their keyboard. While you can hack it to make it clickable, there's really much point in using it when there's something out there that does the job. Now, while they're often used interchangeably, there is a difference between whether or not you should be using a button or a link. A button is traditionally used to trigger an action, such as for a toggle, whereas a link will send you to somewhere else, whether that's another part of a page, another page, an email address, a phone number, or a file. Remember that you should be using CSS to change how you want something to look. So even if something should look like a button, you can use your CSS to do that. Don't just use a H6 because it's the right size, just make a H2 smaller. As I said before, divs and spans are layout-only elements, and all they do is apply display block or display inline to the content. One of the things that screen readers do is they take into account everything that's on a page and they provide this information to the user. This includes a list of landmarks like headings, controls for tables, and information about lists that they're about to encounter. When divs are used for things that require interaction, for example, headings, buttons, and tables, they can't be translated into a more usable format, so the user doesn't know what we're intending for them to do with it. We're relying on visual formatting only. For example, when encountering a list, a screen reader will give information about the list you're about to encounter, the type of list it is, more importantly, how many items are in that list. Imagine how annoying it'd be for someone navigating with their keyboard and encountering an unsemantic list and being stuck in the middle of it because the screen reader just sees a heap of divs, doesn't realize you're using it as a list, and it doesn't know how to get the user out of it because it doesn't see where it ends. You know, unless someone does want to see all 201 items on my Christmas list. Next question. What is the DT element? Is it downtown, definition term, description term, or David Thomas? For those of you who don't know, David Thomas is DT.
Boo. What?
Sam did go first, so we'll give him a shot. Sam, what's the answer?
Definition term.
So, depending on where you're looking this up, this is actually often called either the definition or the description term. One of the lesser known list siblings, the definition or description list, comprises of the DL, DT, and DD elements, and it allows you to define a term and a description or definition associated with that term. This is often used to define a list of terms, for example, in a glossary, or to show metadata, for example, when you have key value pairs, like when you list specifications of a computer. What is the correct place to use a table element? Is it for layouts, for data, for email templates, or for nightmares? Yes. Yes. Tables have developed a bit of a bad rap because of the nightmare that they create when they used to be used for when they used to be used more for layouts and when they're still used for email templates. Who here has to deal with email templates? Yeah, it's a nightmare. However, they have one secret superpower that we forget about, which is data. If something looks like it should be in a table, or you would expect to see it in a table, then just put it in a table. You won't get in trouble if you're using a table the exact way it was intended to be used. I have an input field. How should I let people know what the field is for? Should I use a heading, a label, a placeholder, or a legend? Hang on. Can someone please just pick something?
Middle. All right.
Yeah.
Label.
Hey!
Although most forms we see on the web these days do just have placeholders, it's not something that the screen reader is able to interpret for users, and so it can't let people know what the field is for or what sort of information they should be putting in it. Even if your designer doesn't want to use a label, I know it looks clunky, it's not as clean as a placeholder. You should be using a label and hiding it visually so that only a screen reader can pick it up. Similarly, a legend is a useful element to show the title of a form. So just as each field should have a label, you should make sure that each form has a legend. Where would I see a data list? Is it with tables, with lists, with forms, or with meta info?
Guess one.
Yep. Sorry.
Forms.
That was my mistake. What were you going to say?
I was going to say meta info, but then I saw the answer. It's the one that is the answer.
I'm so glad I put meta info in because that's the second person it's caught. Okay, yeah, no one gets that point because I stuffed up. Sorry, guys. A data list works with an import, and it's useful to not only reduce human error with gathering data, but also to make the user experience of entering data a lot better. So who has ever encountered a select list with a lot of options and you got to scroll? Yeah, difficult to deal with. But if you have a text field, it means that you may get user error and they may type something in wrong or give an invalid option. Data list allows you to define a set list of options, but the user will then type into the input field and it will narrow down the options for them. This is functionality that we are starting to see in select fields for some browsers. For example, Safari is doing it both on iOS and on desktop. However, for others, you can use a data list. Okay, if I'm using a mark tag, am I trying to do a strike through, highlight, signature, or markdown? Sam? Yes. Although we don't often see highlighted text on the web these days, although Medium is a bit of a different one with that, it's useful for creating emphasis on text rather than just using your usual bold or italic. It works really well. It works really well in multi-line text as well, and you can change whatever color you want. Unfortunately, this isn't a semantic tag, so screen readers won't pick up that you've used a different tag over a section. So if you do need to let them know that you've emphasized the text, make sure you keep that in mind. If I'm using a source element, am I dealing with videos, pictures, audio, or code?
I believe the answer is code.
You're going to be so upset about this
I
one.
think it's all the other three. It's all the other three.
Yes! You picked the only wrong answer.
Who is in charge of naming
Is that
these
how you
things?
get
Because,
points?
I would expect like source to be on the outside and then code inside the source code.
It's complete opposite to the source tag. So that was a trick question. However, still got it wrong. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So the source element is actually used with the audio, video, and picture elements. One of the reasons it's really useful for the picture element is it allows us to dictate a media query and a varying set of options for images to render. So it means we can use responsive images in our HTML. This works similar to how CSS media queries do, so that's really useful to have. Okay, the Q element. Is it for the queen, quiz, quote, or quota? Yes. Yes, the Q element is not something that we see a lot of these days. It is for inline quotations. Not sure whether anyone does much of this, but if my time at uni taught me anything, it's to make sure when I'm using a quote that I reference it properly as well. So the inline quotation is useful for if we don't need to separate the quote from the main body of text. And then the cite element, which is often used with it as well, is to have a user-friendly way of showing where you've gotten the quote from. Depending on which specification you're following, you can use the author's name in your citation. I have this evening because, for anyone who doesn't know, Julie Grundy is one of our long-time Fenders speakers who was meant to be here tonight. It's got way less emphasis because she's not here, which is a little bit sad. So depending on which specification you're reading, you can or can't use the author's name in there. W3C says you can if you would like. WHATWG says absolutely cannot use the author's name in your citation. I don't know why you would give such a flat out no, but that is the case. Cite element also works really well with the block quote, which you'll probably be more familiar with. So the block quote, again, is a quote that has separated from the main body of text, and the cite is used to show where we got it from. One of the advantages of using HTML5 specifications is we don't have the same disadvantages of using something new that we have with using new CSS and JavaScript standards. For example, if we're wanting to use something new in CSS or JavaScript, we need to have a look at the browsers that support it, any browsers that we support, decide whether or not we want to continue to support all of them, and if needed, implement fallbacks available. HTML, however, is forwards compatible, so if a browser doesn't recognize a particular element, we'll continue to render the content inside it anyway. Unfortunately, as we're all familiar with, i.e. very difficult about this one, it actually won't apply styles to unknown elements, and it won't allow you to use an unknown element in a CSS selector. So unfortunately, if you need to use IE, that's still a bit of a difficult one. Other than that, the browser support for the current set of HTML5 standards is pretty good across both mobile and desktop browsers. Remember, technology doesn't actually care how your website looks, so make sure you give it the right element to interpret. Then use the tools you have at your disposal to make it look how you want it to. People are going to be using your site differently to how you use it. They may be using it in ways that you don't expect them to. If you think that a recommended element won't work for you, remember there are a lot of things you need to take into account other than how it's going to look on your site. Can someone use it with a mouse? Can they navigate to it with their keyboard? If they're using their keyboard, do you have a change of focus state? Do they know when they've changed to something else? And is it going to give the user feedback on what has happened, what is going to happen? We don't know how people are going to use our site, but they're always going to be consuming the HTML. So make sure it's semantic and logical from the beginning, otherwise we're just building a site on dodgy foundations. So don't be afraid to check the latest HTML spec or to read up on something new. We need to stay up with these standard changes because they are changing with the times. Not as quickly as JavaScript does, but you know, that's a pretty fast one to keep up with. We need to keep up with how HTML is changing though. Otherwise, not only are we making things harder for ourselves, we're making it harder for other people who are using our site.